The sky wept, and the rain came down in sheets so thick they blurred the world into a canvas of gray and black. Jess gripped the steering wheel of her rattling rescue van, the windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against the deluge. She could hear the chorus of barks and whines from the crates behind her, a symphony of canine anxiety that was a familiar soundtrack to her life. A late-night transport of a half-dozen strays from a high-kill shelter to her sanctuary, Second Chances, was a regular occurrence, but tonight the universe seemed to be laughing at her. The roads were slick, visibility was a joke, and she was running on a potent mix of lukewarm coffee and pure stubbornness. It was on a particularly desolate stretch of highway, where the only lights were her own and the occasional flicker of a faraway farmhouse, that she saw him. He was on his knees at the side of the road, in the slick, muddy gravel that bordered the asphalt. The rain beat down on him relentlessly, plastering his clothes to his broad frame. He wasn't trying to hitchhike. He wasn't waving a frantic arm or holding a thumb out. He was just there, a statue of utter despair, head bowed, his shoulders shaking with a silent tremor. Jess's first thought was, oh God, he's going to get hit. Her second thought, the one that always won out, was, he looks like a lost animal. And to Jess, who had a weakness for strays and broken things, that was all the reason she needed. She slowed down, her foot easing off the gas, and pulled over with a groan of grinding gears. The van's headlights cut through the gloom, illuminating him in a harsh, yellow glow. He was a big man, a powerful figure, even kneeling, with wide shoulders and a frame that suggested a life of hard work. But his posture was one of utter defeat. As she came to a stop, the barking in the back of the van reached a new fever pitch. The man lifted his head slowly, like it was a great effort. His face was a chiseled study in exhaustion, stubbled and streaked with mud and water. But his eyes were what stopped Jess cold. They were a startling golden brown, like polished amber, and they held no hint of recognition, no spark of humanity. They were wild, lost, and filled with a deep, profound pain. A low, guttural sound rumbled in his chest, a sound that was both a plea and a warning, a noise that vibrated in the air and seemed to make the very dogs in her van fall silent. It was a sound that should have sent a bolt of pure fear through her, but it didn't. Jess, despite a flicker of unease and a small, rational voice in her head screaming at her to just go, just saw a man in desperate need of help. She unbuckled her seatbelt and pushed open the heavy door of the van. The blast of cold, wet air hit her like a physical force. "Hey," she called out, her voice a little shaky but firm. "Are you okay? Do you need a hand?" He didn't answer. His golden eyes just watched her, tracking her every movement. He seemed to shrink in on himself, a cornered animal preparing to bolt. The low rumble from his chest grew louder. Jess took a deep breath. She wasn't stupid. She knew this was a terrible idea. But she was a woman who had spent her life helping creatures with no voice. She had seen that look before, the one that said, "I am alone and I am broken." It was the look in the eyes of the stray dogs she had saved, the ones who had been abandoned and abused. She knew how to speak that language. "It's okay," she said softly, holding her hands up to show she was no threat. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Jess. You look lost. Can I help?" He just stared at her, his head cocked to the side, a gesture that was unsettlingly canine. The rain poured down on him and she saw him shiver again, a violent, full-body shudder. She moved closer, slowly, taking a step onto the muddy shoulder. The rational part of her brain was screaming, "This is how horror movies start." The other, more dominant part, the part that had a weakness for strays and a heart the size of a mountain, just saw a man in desperate need of warmth and care. "I have a place," she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "A warm place. I can give you a ride. No questions asked. You just need to get in the car." He didn't move. He just watched her, his golden eyes filled with a raw, animalistic uncertainty. Jess sighed, a long, weary exhalation that was part frustration, part acceptance. She went back to the van and grabbed the ratty, old blanket she kept for the animals, the one with a chewed-up corner from a particularly feisty terrier. She held it out to him, a peace offering. "Please," she said, her voice full of a genuine plea. "You'll catch your death out here. Just come with me. I promise I'm not a lunatic." She gave a weak, lopsided smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He didn't take the blanket. Instead, he slowly, painstakingly got to his feet. He was taller than she had expected, a towering figure that loomed in the gloom. He still said nothing. He just looked at her, then at the van full of barking dogs, and a strange sort of understanding seemed to flicker in his eyes. He didn't say a word as he slowly walked toward her. He didn't say a word as he climbed into the passenger seat, his movements still disoriented and clumsy, like a fawn learning to use its legs. The air in the van immediately filled with the damp scent of wet earth and something else, something wild and feral, a scent Jess couldn't place. He just sat there, shivering, his clothes soaked, his golden eyes fixed on her. And as she pulled back onto the road, the rhythmic squeak of the wipers a familiar comfort, Jess had a single thought guiding her actions. He needed a home and she was going to give it to him. And in that moment, in the warmth of her rescue van, a new chapter began for a woman with a heart for strays and a man who was lost, not just in the rain, but in a world he no longer recognized. Chapter 1. The fluorescent lights of the shelter's intake room buzzed overhead, a stark contrast to the quiet, rainy world outside. Jess stood in the doorway, a mug of steaming tea in her hands, and watched the new man, the man she had decided to call Hardin, stare, completely mesmerized, at the 2-year-old beagle named Barnaby as he licked a peanut butter-filled Kong. The man she had rescued from the side of the road had no memory, no name, and the instincts of a lost stray. With a wry smile, Jess decided that Hardin it was. He was hard and strong, but his eyes held a softness that belied his powerful frame. He was, to put it simply, a stray. And her animal shelter, Second Chances, was her sanctuary, a place of peace and order. But that order was quickly being shattered by her newest and strangest rescue. The first few days with Hardin were a comedy of errors. He was a gentle giant, but his behavior was baffling. When she offered him a plate of food, he lowered his head and ate it off the floor, his movements instinctual and animalistic. Jess, hiding a smile behind her mug, had to gently coax him to a chair at the small dinner table in her apartment above the shelter. "Hardin," she had said softly, pointing to the chair, "we sit here. Like a person." He had blinked at her, those golden brown eyes full of genuine confusion, before slowly, deliberately, pulling the chair out and sitting with the stiffness of a man who had never used one before. Teaching him to use a fork was another hilarious ordeal. He would hold it with the awkward grace of a chimpanzee trying on a tuxedo, his large fingers dwarfing the utensil. One evening, as they were eating spaghetti, he got frustrated and, with a low growl of annoyance, simply picked up the bowl and slurped the pasta down, earning a startled yelp from Jess and a full-throated bark from the kennel downstairs. His senses were unnervingly sharp. He'd flinch at a sound Jess couldn't hear, his ears twitching as if tuning into a frequency only he could perceive. The mailman was a constant source of tension. The moment the mail truck pulled up to the curb, Hardin's entire body would go rigid. A low, menacing growl would rumble in his chest, and his eyes would narrow to feral slits. Jess had to reassure the terrified mailman that her very large, very quiet new housemate was just eccentric. She would distract Hardin with a tennis ball or a chew toy or a dog biscuit, anything she could grab in a panic. The first time she offered him a dog biscuit, he took it gently from her hand, his massive fingers brushing hers. He looked at the treat, then at her, and then slowly, as if with great thought, he ate it, a look of profound satisfaction on his face. Jess couldn't help but laugh, a bright, clear sound that made him tilt his head, a flicker of something she couldn't quite name in his eyes. He had a strange and powerful sense of smell. He'd leave his scent on everything, her favorite reading chair, the throw blanket on her couch, even her clothes. He would rub his large frame against a piece of furniture, then sniff it as if marking his territory. Jess, in her bewildered state, just thought it was a new and quirky habit, something like a cat needing a blanket. "Hardin," she would say with a sigh, pulling a sweater he had just rubbed his cheek on. "That's what dogs do. You're not a dog." He would just look at her, those intense eyes filled with an unshakable devotion, and she would simply shake her head and let him be. He was a gentle giant, but his strength was unexpected and often destructive. He would accidentally crush a mug with his grip or tear a doorknob off the door. One morning she found him trying to help her with the laundry, and he had somehow managed to rip the dryer door completely off its hinges. Her exasperated groan was met with a look of pure apologetic guilt on his face, which made her melt. Jess found herself falling into a new, strange routine. Her morning coffee was now shared with a silent man who ate his toast with his hands and watched her with a fierce, unwavering loyalty. When she was working in the shelter, he would follow her around, not like a lost man, but like a devoted companion. He would stand guard outside the dog runs as she cleaned them, his back to her, his body language a solid wall of protection. He would instinctively sense when one of the dogs was in distress and would sit by their kennel until they calmed down. Their early days were filled with these bizarre and endearing moments. The man who was once a wild stranger on the road had become a silent, loyal, and utterly baffling part of her life. Jess, in her kind and compassionate soul, simply tried to train him to be more human, using dog biscuits and positive reinforcement to teach him to sit at the dinner table and not growl at the mailman. And with every goofy, bewildering moment, with every act of quiet, unquestioning devotion, Jess found herself falling for him. It wasn't a sudden, dramatic fall, but a slow, gentle descent, like falling asleep in a warm blanket. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, a stray she couldn't fix, but he was hers. And as he sat on the floor watching Barnaby with a look of intense fascination, Jess knew without a doubt that she had made the right choice in bringing him home. He was a new rescue and she was going to give him a second chance. Chapter 2. Jess sat in the brightly lit, sterile office of her best friend, Dr. Anya Sharma. Anya was a brilliant neurologist, a woman who spoke in complex medical terms and had a mind like a steel trap. Jess, on the other hand, spoke in dog barks and tail wags. They were an unlikely pair, but they had been inseparable since college. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the rhythmic clicking of Anya's pen. "Jess," Anya said, finally putting her pen down and folding her hands on her desk. She wore a crisp white lab coat that seemed to radiate professionalism, a stark contrast to Jess's worn-out jeans and dog hair-covered sweatshirt. "I've been listening to your increasingly strange stories about this Hardin." He paused as if savoring the name. "You've described a man who eats off the floor, chases squirrels with unnerving intensity, and growls at the mailman. You've also mentioned that you are using dog biscuits as a form of positive reinforcement." Anya's expression was a mix of concern and bewildered amusement. Jess took a deep breath. "He's a work in progress. And the dog biscuits work. He knows, sit now." "Sort of." Anya leaned forward, her voice softening. "Jess, I'm serious. He's not a stray. He's a human being. He needs to see a specialist, not a vet. His behavior, the memory loss, the animalistic instincts you're describing, those are all symptoms of something far more complex than a simple head injury." Jess twisted the mug of tea in her hands, its warmth a small comfort. "I know, but he seems fine. He's not hurting anyone. He's just lost. And I'm good at helping lost things. Helping a lost dog and helping a lost man with a potentially serious neurological condition are two very different things," Anya countered gently. "He deserves to be seen by someone who can actually help him." Jess looked up, a flicker of stubbornness in her eyes. "He's not ready. He's still feral. He flinches at loud noises and tries to hide in closets when he's scared. I think a hospital would scare him more. He trusts me." Anya's gaze was compassionate. She knew her friend. Jess had a heart too big for her own good, and she saw the best in every creature no matter how broken. She also knew that Jess was drawn to Hardin's unwavering loyalty and his gentle heart. He was oddly protective of her, standing guard outside her room at night and instinctively sensing when she was upset. Anya had seen it for herself. The day she had come over, she had accidentally tripped over a dog toy, and Hardin had been at Jess's side in a flash, a low, protective growl rumbling in his chest as he assessed Anya for any hint of threat. "He's a guardian," Anya had said to Jess later, her voice thoughtful. "Not a stray. There's a difference." The ridiculous training sessions continued back at the shelter, much to the amusement of Jess's one employee, a college kid named Marco who was perpetually late and perpetually fascinated by Hardin. "He's like a human dog," Marco had whispered to Jess one morning as they watched Hardin stalk a fly buzzing against a window pane. "He's not a dog," Jess had grumbled, though she couldn't help but agree. Hardin's progress was sporadic. He'd learned to use a fork, painstakingly spearing a piece of chicken, only to get distracted by a bird outside the window and leap to the glass with alarming speed, his hands leaving a perfect ghostly print. Jess would sigh, then grab a paper towel and clean the glass, a small, weary smile on her face. He'd follow her around the shelter, not like a lost man, but like a loyal companion. She'd be mucking out a kennel, her back to him, and she could feel his presence, a solid, silent force watching over her. It was unnerving and also incredibly comforting. Their quiet moments together were what Jess cherished most. He was a man of few words, and even those were simple, guttural sounds. He communicated with his eyes, with the slightest shift of his body. He'd sit on the couch while she worked on her laptop, his large frame somehow both massive and unobtrusive. He would just watch her, those golden brown eyes full of an unreadable intensity. Sometimes she'd feel his hand brush her leg, a soft, tentative touch, as if he were just checking to make sure she was real. One evening, after a particularly stressful day dealing with a new, aggressive rescue, Jess had collapsed on the couch, exhausted and emotionally drained. She didn't cry, she didn't make a sound, but Hardin, who had been on the floor, was at her side in an instant. He didn't speak. He just gently put his head in her lap like a giant, confused puppy and let out a soft, low whine. It was a sound of pure empathy, and it was the most comforting thing Jess had ever experienced. The next day, as she was filling out paperwork, Hardin came and sat beside her at her desk. He gently took the pen from her hand, studied it for a long moment, then with a concentrated frown, began to draw on her legal pad. The drawing was simple, childlike, but she could make out the shapes. A crude stick figure of a woman, a lopsided drawing of a dog, and then a figure of a man with two prominent, pointed ears. He looked at her, then pointed at the drawing of the man. She just stared, her heart thumping in her chest. "Hardin?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. He just pointed at the figure again, then at himself, and then at the drawing of the woman and the dog. He was trying to say something. He was trying to say they were a family. Their ridiculous training sessions continued. Hardin would learn to use a spoon, only to get distracted by a sudden gust of wind that rustled the trees, and he would leap from his chair, his body tense and on high alert. Jess, with a soft laugh, would just tell him to leave it, a command she had used on countless dogs, and he would obey, slowly returning to his chair. He'd follow her around the shelter, a silent, powerful shadow. He was always there, always watching. Jess found herself falling for his genuine warmth, his unwavering devotion, and the way he looked at her with those golden brown eyes, as if she were the most important person in the world. He was a puzzle she couldn't solve, a creature she didn't understand, but he was hers. And in their shared moments of quiet absurdity and silent understanding, their bond deepened, becoming something more profound than she could have ever imagined. It was a bond built not on words but on a deep, unspoken trust. He trusted her to keep him safe, and she trusted him with her heart. And for a man who had no memory and no name, and a woman who had a weakness for strays, that was more than enough. Chapter 3. The air felt different. Heavy. Electric. Jess couldn't put her finger on it, but she felt it in the low, anxious whines of the dogs in their kennels and in the unusual stillness that had fallen over the normally bustling shelter. For the past 2 days, Hardin had been restless, a bundle of barely contained energy. He paced their small apartment back and forth like a caged animal. He wouldn't eat. He wouldn't sit. His golden brown eyes, usually so full of gentle warmth, were wild, darting around the room as if searching for an escape. The first full moon since Hardin's arrival was an ordeal. Jess had no idea why, but every time the sun set, his agitation would double. He was an exposed wire, buzzing with a frantic energy. He tried to hide his behavior, locking himself in her walk-in closet, a space so small he had to crouch to fit. She would find him there, curled up in a corner, his body shaking with a silent tremor. The first time she found him, she had been baffled. "Hardin, what are you doing?" she had asked, her voice soft with concern. He had just looked at her, his face a mask of shame, and slowly backed further into the shadows. He had closed his eyes and a low, pained sound had escaped his lips, a sound of profound inner struggle. Jess, worried sick, had coaxed him out with a bowl of warm soup and a gentle hand. He ate it in silence, his powerful frame still tense. He would sit beside her, and she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a palpable sign of the internal battle he was fighting. He would stare at the window, at the sky, at anything but her. He was pulling away and it broke her heart. He had to get to the bottom of it. One evening, after he had been pacing for hours, she cornered him gently by the couch. "Hardin," she said, her voice firm but kind. "You've been acting so strange. What's going on? What's wrong?" He just looked at her, his jaw set, his eyes a tormented gold. He wanted to tell her, she knew it, but he couldn't. He didn't have the words. He didn't have the memory. All he had was a primal, confusing need that was consuming him from the inside out. He backed away, his body language a plea for distance, and he retreated to the closet again, this time closing the door firmly behind him. Jess sighed, a long, weary sound, and leaned against the closet door, her head against the cool wood. "Please don't hide," she whispered. "Whatever it is, we'll face it together. Just come out. Please." She waited. Silence. A long, heavy silence broken only by the frantic thumping of her own heart. Then from inside the closet she heard it. A low, pained whimper, followed by the sound of his ragged breathing. She heard him struggling with something, a fight he was losing. She felt the vibrations of his inner torment through the door. She couldn't stand it. She grabbed the doorknob and pulled. He had somehow managed to get it locked. She jiggled it, twisted it, and tried to force it open. Nothing. The lock was stuck, or maybe he was holding it shut. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at her. "Hardin, let me in," she called out, her voice a little frantic now. Suddenly, a loud, splintering sound came from inside the closet. The door flew open, the wood around the lock splintered and broken, and Hardin stumbled out. His eyes were wide with a kind of terrified desperation. He was covered in sweat, his body shaking violently, and his hands were clenched into fists, his knuckles white. Jess stared at the broken door, then at him, her heart thudding against her ribs. He had broken it. With his bare hands. He looked at the door, then at her, and his eyes filled with a fresh wave of shame. He was a monster, he thought. He was a monster, and he had just proved it. That's when it happened. The moon, a perfect, blindingly white orb, emerged from behind a thick bank of clouds. Its light poured through the living room window, casting everything in an ethereal, ghostly glow. Hardin's head snapped up. His eyes, the startling golden brown she had come to know so well, widened. His chest heaved, his shoulders rose, and a low, guttural moan rumbled from deep within his throat. It was a sound full of wildness and pain, a sound that made the dogs in the shelter stir and start to whine in a chorus of shared distress. The sound grew, rising in pitch and volume until it was a full-throated, long, mournful howl. It was a sound so full of raw, untamed wildness, a sound that spoke of centuries of pain and longing, that it made the very hairs on Jess's arms stand up. It was the sound of a creature that belonged to the moon and the night, a creature that was trapped in a human body. Jess stood there, frozen, staring at the man she had rescued, the man she had come to love. The howling continued, a primal expression of torment, of a soul struggling to break free of a cage it didn't understand. She saw the pain in his eyes, the sheer, unadulterated agony of a man who was fighting against his own nature. The howl ended as abruptly as it began. Hardin's eyes, still a fierce, luminous gold, locked with hers. He saw the shock, the confusion, and a flicker of pity in her gaze. He saw his own brokenness reflected in her eyes, and the shame, deep and profound, washed over him. He was a monster. He was not a man, not a stray dog, but something else entirely. Something terrifying. He turned and bolted. He ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, and out the back door of the shelter. Jess watched him go, powerless to stop him. He ran into the woods behind the shelter, a dark, silent shadow consumed by the night. She stood in the doorway, the sound of his desperate howl still echoing in her ears. She didn't know how long she stood there. It felt like an eternity. The dogs in their kennels had quieted, a collective silence having fallen over them. The air was still thick with the aftermath of his pain. She went back inside and sat on the couch, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. She felt cold, a deep, bone-chilling cold that had nothing to do with the night air. She felt alone. The man she had taken in, the man she had so foolishly started to fall for, was something she didn't understand. Something dangerous. Hours passed. The moon began its descent, and the sky began to lighten with the first hint of dawn. Jess heard the faint sound of the back door of the shelter opening. She ran downstairs, her heart hammering against her ribs. Hardin stood in the middle of the intake room. He was covered in mud, his clothes torn, his hair matted with dirt and leaves. He looked exhausted, as if he had run for 100 miles without stopping. He looked at her, and his eyes were no longer golden. They were a deep, familiar brown, filled with a look of pure, agonizing defeat. He looked broken. More broken than he had been on the side of the road in the rain. Jess didn't say a word. She didn't scold him for breaking the door or for running away. She didn't ask him what he was. She just looked at the immense, gentle soul standing before her, a soul that had been struggling with something he couldn't control. She walked to the linen closet and pulled out a warm blanket, a thick fleece one she kept for the animals who were sick. She went to the kitchen and filled a bowl with warm chicken soup, the same soup she had used to coax him out of his closet. She brought them both to him. She held out the soup bowl, her hands steady. "Here," she said, her voice soft and full of a profound, unwavering compassion. "You need to eat." He looked at the blanket, then at the soup, then at her. Tears, hot and silent, welled in his eyes. He had run from her, howling like a beast, and she had come back to him, not with fear but with kindness. In that simple act, in the warmth of the soup and the soft folds of the blanket, a new understanding passed between them. He wasn't a broken stray. He was a man with a wildness inside him, a wildness he didn't understand. And she wasn't a hero, just a woman with a big heart. In that moment their bond deepened, becoming something unbreakable, something forged in the fire of his pain and her boundless love. He had found a home, and she had found her purpose. Chapter 4. The days after the full moon were a quiet, fragile truce. Hardin was no longer a lost stray or a feral beast. He was a man with a heavy secret, and the weight of it was a tangible presence in the apartment. His eyes, though back to their familiar warm brown, held a new depth, a new shadow. The shame he felt was immense, but it was now laced with something else. Confusion. His memory came back in flashes. Not a full torrent, but a series of disjointed, powerful images that hit him like a physical blow. He would be washing dishes, his hands submerged in soapy water, and suddenly he would be standing in a forest, the scent of pine and wet earth filling his senses. He would feel a powerful sense of a pack, of a close-knit family moving as one, their bodies a blur of power and fur. A feeling of belonging, of a deep, unshakable loyalty, would wash over him, so strong it would make his head ache. Another time he was sitting on the couch watching Jess read, and a powerful, painful memory would hit him. A confrontation. A fight. He remembered the taste of blood in his mouth, the guttural snarls, the snapping jaws. He remembered a powerful hand on his shoulder, a familiar voice, a feeling of betrayal so profound it made him feel hollow. He didn't know the full story, but he knew he was a part of something big, something powerful, and that he had been in a fight. He saw flashes of a man with cold, cruel eyes, a man he instinctively knew was an enemy. He saw a flash of a woman's face, a powerful, dark-haired figure. The memories were a puzzle, and he had no idea how the pieces fit together. But he knew this. He wasn't just a lost human. He was a part of something bigger, and something terrible had happened. The fear of his past clashed with his love for his new life. He had found a sanctuary, a quiet, gentle woman who looked at him not with fear but with love. He had found a home, a purpose, and a sense of belonging he had never known. The thought of losing it, of his past ruining their future, was a torment more painful than any fight he had ever been in. He started to pull away from Jess. The playful, goofy moments were replaced with a tangible tension. The comedy of their life was replaced with a quiet, heavy drama. He tried to be more human, to be the man she wanted him to be, the man he had been a few short weeks ago. But his instincts kept getting in the way. He'd be sitting at the dinner table, and Jess would get up to get something from the kitchen, and he would find himself on his feet, his body on high alert, ready to stand guard over her. He would catch himself growling under his breath at a person he didn't like, a contractor who came to fix the broken closet door, or a snooty couple who came to look at a puppy. His eyes, in moments of stress, would flash with that feral, golden light, a part of himself he couldn't hide anymore. Jess felt the emotional distance between them and was heartbroken. She wanted to help him, but he was holding back. He had built a wall around himself, a silent, powerful barrier she couldn't breach. She would try to talk to him, to ask him what was wrong, but he would just shake his head and look away, his eyes full of a pain she couldn't reach. She missed the little things. She missed the clumsy way he would try to use a fork, the way he would sniff the mail before bringing it in, the way he would sit at her feet like a loyal dog. Now he was a silent, brooding stranger. He was more human, but he was also more distant. One night she found him sitting on the roof of the shelter, his powerful frame silhouetted against the dark sky. She climbed up the rickety ladder, a blanket in her hands. She sat beside him in silence, not saying a word. "I am not a good person," he finally said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. It was the longest sentence he had ever said. The words were simple, but they were full of a deep, profound self-loathing. Jess looked at him, her heart aching. "Hardin," she said softly, "you're the best person I know." He just shook his head. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." "I know what you've done since you've been here," she countered, her voice firm. "You've been kind to every dog, you've been gentle with me, and you've been a loyal friend. That's all I need to know." He looked at her, and his eyes, in the pale moonlight, were filled with a profound sadness. He wanted to believe her, but he couldn't. He was a creature of the wild, and she was a creature of peace. Their two worlds were never meant to collide. The romance was now built on a foundation of a secret he was desperately trying to keep. He was terrified that if she knew the truth she would leave him. He didn't want to be a burden, a monster, a broken creature she had to fix. He just wanted to be the man who loved her. And she, in her boundless love, was terrified that he was slipping away, that she was losing the man she had worked so hard to save. The once light-hearted, comical story had now become a heavy, emotional battle of wills, and the silence between them was as loud as a full moon howl. He was running from a past he couldn't remember, and she was fighting to hold on to a future she couldn't imagine without him. The air was thick with unspoken words and unconfessed fears, and it was only a matter of time before the truth, like a pack of wolves on the hunt, came for him. And when it did, he wasn't sure he could protect her from it. Chapter 5. The tangible tension that had settled between Jess and Hardin had been a quiet, heavy presence, but it reached a fever pitch on a Tuesday morning when a new, more immediate threat arrived. A pristine black SUV, a jarringly out-of-place symbol of wealth and indifference, pulled up to the front of the shelter. A man emerged from the driver's seat, a sneer already etched on his face. He was dressed in a suit that looked far too expensive for a dusty animal shelter, and his eyes, a cold, calculating gray, scanned the property with open disdain. He introduced himself as Mr. Harris, a developer, and he wasted no time getting to the point. "This property," he said, gesturing around with a condescending sweep of his hand, "is zoned for commercial use. The noise complaints alone are a nightmare. The health department has a file on this place a mile thick, and frankly, we have a petition from the community. We're offering to buy you out. A fair price, of course." Jess felt the blood drain from her face. She had spent a decade of her life building second chances. It was more than a business. It was a home, a sanctuary. She had poured every ounce of her savings, her time, and her heart into it. And this man, with his cold eyes and his expensive suit, was threatening to take it all away. "This isn't just a business," she said, her voice shaking with a quiet fury. "This is a no-kill shelter. We save lives here. And as for noise complaints, all we have are animals. They get noisy." Mr. Harris gave her a condescending smile. "I'm a realist, Miss Harrington. You're a bleeding heart. And bleeding hearts are bad for business. You'll never get the funding to keep this place running, not with the local opposition we've manufactured. We're doing you a favor. Take the money and you can retire somewhere nice." Hardin, who had been sitting quietly on the front porch, seemed to sense the shift in the air. He had been so still, so quiet since the full moon, his withdrawal a silent form of suffering. But now his entire body went rigid. His eyes, fixed on Mr. Harris, began to shift, a faint flicker of gold shimmering beneath the brown. A low, menacing rumble, like the distant sound of thunder, vibrated in his chest. Jess put a hand on his arm, a silent plea for him to stay calm, but his muscles were tense, coiled and ready to strike. He was no longer the quiet, brooding man she had come to know. He was a force of nature, a creature of instinct. Mr. Harris seemed to not even notice. He just continued to talk down to her, his voice dripping with condescension. "I have a check right here. A very generous offer considering the state of this place. We'll even help you find a new job. Maybe something less messy." Jess had had enough. "Get off my property," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "I'm not selling. Not now, not ever." Mr. Harris's eyes narrowed. "I see. Well then, perhaps we should speed up the process. I'm sure a few calls to the right people will get the health inspectors here in a flash. You wouldn't want them to see what's in those kennels, would you? The unsanitary conditions, the poor, sick dogs. It would be a shame to have them all put down." The threat was clear. He wasn't just offering to buy her out. He was threatening to destroy everything she had built, everything she held dear. He was a bully, a monster in a suit, and his cruelty was a physical presence in the air. That was the line. That was the line Hardin's instincts couldn't abide. Hardin stood up slowly, deliberately, his massive frame looming behind Jess. The low growl in his chest deepened, becoming a full-throated snarl. His lips curled back, revealing a flash of teeth. His eyes were no longer brown, but a pure, terrifying feral gold, a color that seemed to burn with an inner fire. He stood between Jess and Mr. Harris, his body a wall of solid muscle. The developer's smug expression evaporated. He took an involuntary step back, his eyes widening in fear. He had been prepared for a fight, but not with a creature that looked like it had crawled out of a nightmare. Hardin was panting, his nostrils flared, and he was on high alert. He was ready to fight, to tear this man apart for threatening his home, his family. "I think," Mr. Harris stammered, his voice a little shaky. "I'll be going. We'll be in touch." He backed away slowly, his eyes never leaving Hardin's. He stumbled backward into his SUV, got in and sped away, a streak of black against the bright morning. Jess was left to face Hardin, who was panting, his body still on high alert, the feral light still burning in his eyes. He had protected her, but in doing so he had revealed a part of himself he couldn't hide anymore. A part that was far from human. Later that night, the emotional distance between them had been replaced by a quiet, raw intimacy. She sat with him on the couch, not saying a word, just running her fingers through his dark, thick hair. He was still tense, still humming with a suppressed energy, but he leaned into her touch. "You're not a monster," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. He just closed his eyes, a pained look on his face. "Yes," he said, his voice a low, rough whisper. "I am." And then, as her fingers continued to work their magic, a new memory surfaced. A memory that was more than a flash, more than a disjointed image. It was a sensation. A smell. The powerful, commanding scent of pine and earth. A smell so potent it was as if he was standing in a forest after a rain. He remembered the feeling of that scent, a scent that was a part of him, a scent that was his family, his pack. He remembered the feel of the wind in his fur, the sound of his brothers and sisters running beside him, a symphony of pounding paws and low growls. He remembered a sense of belonging, a home, and a purpose that had been lost. And then he remembered the pain. The overwhelming, crushing agony of a magical curse. A spell that had made him forget. He was a werewolf. Not a broken stray, but a cursed man. He was a part of a pack, a world she couldn't begin to understand. He looked at Jess, at her gentle face, at her hand in his hair, and his mind was made up. He had to leave. His past was not his own, and he couldn't put her in danger. The thought of leaving her was more painful than any fight he had ever been in. It was a torment that eclipsed the memory of the curse, the shame of his feral nature. He had found a home, a love, and a purpose, and he had to abandon it all to keep her safe. The decision was not a choice. It was an inevitability. And the pain of it was a quiet, suffocating agony. Chapter 6. The morning after the developer's visit was a quiet, somber affair. Hardin was still there. He hadn't left. He had slept on the floor beside Jess's bed, a silent, watchful guardian, and the air between them was thick with unspoken words and the painful, unmade decision to leave. He was a man with a heavy weight on his shoulders, a weight he was carrying for both of them. He moved with a quiet resignation, his eyes filled with a heartbreaking farewell before he had even gone. Jess, for her part, just watched him, her heart aching. She knew he was a man who belonged to the night, to the wild, to a secret world, and the thought of him being ripped away from her was a torment she couldn't bear. The bell on the front door of the shelter jingled, a sharp, cheerful sound that was entirely out of place in the somber atmosphere. Jess looked up, a weary frown on her face. A strange man stood in the doorway. He had a powerful, commanding presence that seemed to fill the room, pushing the air out of her lungs. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean, athletic frame. He wore simple jeans and a dark green shirt, but he carried himself with an innate authority that was impossible to ignore. His eyes, a startling shade of amber, were what stopped Jess cold. They were the same color as Hardin's had been in the feral light of his rage. He looked around the shelter, his eyes scanning the kennels with an assessing gaze, before they landed on Hardin. A wave of profound relief, so strong it was almost visible, washed over his face, but it was quickly replaced by a subtle, cold hostility. "I'm looking for a man named Hardin," he said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that commanded attention. "I was told he might be here." Jess instinctively moved to stand in front of Hardin. She didn't know who this man was, but she felt a primal protective instinct rise in her. He had a powerful presence, and the way he looked at Hardin, not with warmth but with an intense, calculating assessment, sent a shiver down her spine. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice a little shaky but firm. She saw the flash of surprise in the stranger's eyes, a look that said he wasn't used to being challenged. "My name is Liam," he said, his eyes still fixed on Hardin. "I'm a friend of his. I've been looking for him for weeks." He finally looked at Jess, and a flicker of something she couldn't name, pity? Amusement, crossed his face. "You must be the woman who found him." "Jess, is it?" Jess nodded, her jaw set. "How do you know my name?" "Hardin mentioned you," he said, and the words were simple, but they were laced with a subtle hostility that made Jess's blood run cold. He was polite, but his eyes were constantly on Hardin, assessing him, and there was a subtle possessiveness in his gaze. He looked at Hardin as if he were a lost belonging that he had finally found. Liam's eyes lingered on the scar on Hardin's cheek, the subtle, faded line that she had never asked about. He just stared at him for a long moment, 1,000 unspoken questions passing between them in a silent language Jess couldn't understand. "Hardin," Liam said, his voice dropping to a low, commanding tone. "We need to talk. Alone." Jess instinctively moved to protect him, as if he were a stray she was defending from a cruel human. She had no idea what was going on, but her heart told her this man was bad news. Her hands clenched into fists at her side, a wave of protectiveness so strong it made her tremble. Hardin had been her rescue, her stray, and she wasn't about to let this strange, powerful man take him away. "He's not going anywhere with you," she said, her voice full of a defiance she didn't know she had. A flicker of genuine amusement crossed Liam's face. My. He's found a fierce little protector, hasn't he?" He looked at Hardin, and for a moment his face softened. He saw the bond between them, the deep, unshakable trust that was reflected in Hardin's quiet devotion and Jess's fierce protection. He saw that the man he had been looking for, the man who was so vital to their pack, had found his mate. But his duty to his pack was stronger. The soft moment passed as quickly as it had come. He looked at Hardin, his eyes hardening with a familiar command. "Hardin, the Alpha is looking for you. The pack needs you. You have to come home." Hardin just looked at him, and his expression was a mix of quiet determination and profound sadness. He wasn't a stray. He wasn't a lost man. He was a werewolf, and his place was with his pack. But he had found a new life, a new purpose, and a new family in Jess. He had found his home. "I'm not coming back, Liam," Hardin said, his voice a low, steady rumble. It was the first time Jess had ever heard him say a full sentence, and it was a moment of profound significance. He had found his voice, and he was using it to defy his past. Liam's face went cold. "You don't have a choice. This isn't a request. This is a direct order from the Alpha. We have been looking for you for months. There are things you need to remember. Things you need to know." Hardin just shook his head. He had found his true home with Jess. His pack was a family he couldn't remember, a life he had been magically cursed to forget. But his love for Jess, the simple, honest love they had built in the quiet, mundane moments of their lives, was a feeling he would never forget. Liam's eyes narrowed. "The curse, it's what made you forget everything. But it didn't change who you are. You're one of us. You're a part of the pack. You have to come back." He was a hero, not a broken stray, but he wasn't ready to face the past. Not yet. He had to tell Jess. He had to tell her everything. But he didn't have the words. He didn't have the courage. Jess, meanwhile, was just confused. Curse. Bolfa. She was in a world she didn't understand, a world that was threatening to rip the man she loved away from her. She looked at Liam, then at Hardin, and in that moment she made a decision. She would fight for him. She would fight for the man she loved, the man she had rescued, the man who was now standing up for himself. She would not let him go. The encounter was not a violent confrontation, but a tense meeting of two worlds, two loyalties. And the tension, like a live wire, was about to snap. Chapter 7. The air in the woods behind Jess's shelter was still and cold, heavy with the scent of pine and damp earth. The scent was a constant, almost overwhelming presence to Hardin, a smell that felt like a part of his soul. He had agreed to meet Liam here, away from the shelter, away from the prying eyes of the human world. This was neutral ground, a place where the human and the wild could meet without causing a scene. Jess stood beside him, her hand gripping his arm with a fierce, unwavering strength. She had no idea what was happening, but she wasn't going to let him face this alone. She looked at Liam, who stood a few feet away, his amber eyes watching them both with a stoic, unreadable expression. The tension was not a quiet, simmering thing. It was a tangible presence, a humming in the air that felt like the moment before a storm. This wasn't a fight. This was a reckoning. Liam broke the silence. His voice was low and calm, but it carried the weight of an ancient authority. Hardin, it's time to talk. It's time you remembered everything. It's time she understood. Jess looked at Hardin, a silent question in her eyes. He just squeezed her hand, a silent promise that he wasn't going anywhere. Liam took a deep breath and began to speak, his voice a quiet, somber tone that was a stark contrast to his powerful presence. Hardin is not just a man. He is a werewolf. He is a part of our pack. And he is a vital part of us. His real name is Aiden. He is our alpha's brother, a natural leader and a fierce protector. The words hit Jess like a physical blow. A werewolf. It was a word from a storybook, a fantasy. But as she looked at Hardin, at his immense strength, his feral instincts, the golden light in his eyes, the word settled into her heart with a terrifying, undeniable clarity. It all made sense. The howls, the strength, the instincts, the way he would sniff the air. It wasn't a curse. It was who he was. A magical curse, Liam continued, made him forget who he was. A rival pack, a powerful sorceress wanted to weaken us. They knew Aiden was our heart, our strength. They cursed him, stripped him of his memory, his wolf, and his power. They wanted him to be a broken man, a hollow shell. They left him on the side of the road, believing he was nothing. But they were wrong. Liam looked at Jess, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. They didn't account for you. They didn't account for a human with a heart big enough to heal a broken creature of the night. You gave him a home. You gave him a name. You gave him a reason to fight. The love and kindness you showed him, it was a powerful magic they couldn't undo. He turned back to Hardin, his face serious. Aiden, the curse is wearing off. Your wolf is returning. Your memory is coming back in flashes. You have to come home. Your family is waiting for you. They need you. The pack is without a leader, without its heart. And the rival pack, they are waiting for us to be weak. You have to come back and lead us. The choice was laid bare before them, a chasm between two worlds. His old life, a life of power and duty and family, and his new life, a life of love and quiet normalcy with a woman who had saved him. Hardin looked at Liam, a deep sadness in his eyes. He knew what he was saying was true. He remembered the feeling of his pack, a profound sense of family and belonging. He remembered the faces of his brothers and sisters. He was a werewolf. It was who he was. It was in his blood. But then he looked at Jess. He looked at the woman who had found him on a rainy road, a lost, feral creature. The woman who had given him a name, a home, a purpose. The woman who had looked at his brokenness and seen a soul worthy of love. The woman who had faced down a powerful man with a snarl and a growl. She was his home. She was his family. He took a step forward, his hand still holding hers. He looked at Liam and his mind was made up. He wasn't broken anymore. He was whole, and she was the one who had made him that way. I won't be returning to the pack, Liam, he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that was filled with an unshakable resolve. It was not a declaration of war, but a plea for understanding. My name is Hardin. I am no longer just Aiden. I am a part of this world now. I have a new family, a new purpose. Liam's face was a mixture of frustration and heartbreak. Aiden, this is madness. You're our alpha's brother. You're a leader. You can't just turn your back on your own kind. I'm not turning my back on you. I'm just choosing my own path, Hardin said, his eyes filled with a raw, honest emotion. He looked at Jess, and a quiet, powerful declaration passed between them in a silent exchange of glances. He had found his mate. It was a term from a world she didn't understand, but she felt the truth of it in the way his hand was still holding hers, the way his body was a protective shield in front of her. My place is with her, he said, the words a quiet, powerful testament to his love. She gave me a home when I had none. She showed me what it was to be human, to be loved. My place is with her. I am her mate and she is my home. Liam just stared at them, his expression a mixture of profound sadness and disappointment. The two of them, a human woman and a cursed werewolf, stood in the quiet woods, a silent testament to a love that was stronger than a pack's bond, stronger than a curse, stronger than any obligation. Hardin had chosen his new life, his new love, and his new home. And there was nothing Liam could do to change it. Chapter 8. The words hung in the air, a quiet, powerful testament to his love. My place is with her. I am her mate and she is my home. As the last word left his lips, a powerful surge of energy ran through Hardin, a jolt so strong it made him gasp. It wasn't pain. It was a feeling of wholeness, of a dam breaking. The disjointed flashes of memory that had been tormenting him for weeks now coalesced, weaving themselves together into a coherent, beautiful tapestry. He closed his eyes and in the space of a single heartbeat he saw everything. He remembered his life before the curse. He remembered his name, Aiden. He remembered his pack, a large, powerful family that lived in the heart of the redwood forests of Northern California. He remembered his brother, their alpha, a man of quiet strength and a deep, unwavering sense of duty. He remembered his home, a place of peace and belonging. He wasn't a broken stray. He was a warrior, a protector, the second in command, the wolf who guarded the pack with his life. He remembered the confrontation. A rival alpha, a cruel, power-hungry wolf named Cade, had sought to take control of his pack's territory. Cade had a powerful sorceress at his side, a woman who could weave a magic of forgetting. Aiden had fought Cade, a brutal, bone-shattering battle in the heart of the forest. He had defeated him, but Cade's sorceress, in a final act of vengeance, had cursed him. She had taken his memory, his sense of self, his wolf. She had left him on the side of a highway, a lost, feral creature, believing she had destroyed him. She had wanted to break him. But she had failed. He wasn't a broken man. He was a man with a wildness inside him, a wildness that had been waiting for the love and trust he found in Jess to heal. The love she had given him was a more powerful magic than any curse. It had filled the hollow place the curse had left in his soul. It had given him the strength to remember, to heal, to become whole. He opened his eyes. The world looked different. The scent of the pine and earth was no longer just a memory. It was the scent of his pack, the smell of home. He felt the power of his wolf, the hum of his own magic coursing through his veins. He wasn't a broken stray. He was a werewolf, a powerful, ancient creature, and his place was with the woman he loved. He turned to Liam, who was staring at him with a mixture of shock and awe. "Liam," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble that was filled with an authority he hadn't possessed before. "I remember. Everything. It was Cade. He was the one who cursed me. He was the one who wanted to take our territory. I defeated him, but his sorceress, she was powerful. He took my memory. She thought she had broken me." Liam just stared at him, his face a mask of disbelief. He had been looking for a lost, broken man. He had found a king. "Aiden?" he whispered, a tremor in his voice. Hardin nodded. "I'm not broken anymore. Jess, she healed me. The curse is gone. The magic that kept me from my wolf, it's gone." Liam's eyes, filled with a sudden, overwhelming relief, finally fell on Jess. He saw her not as a stranger, but as the woman who had saved his alpha's brother, the woman who had brought him back to them. "Thank you," he said, his voice raw with emotion. "Thank you for saving him." He looked back at Hardin, a sense of quiet understanding passing between them. The pack would be waiting for him. But he knew in that moment that Hardin's place was with Jess. He had found his true home. Liam looked at Jess one last time, a sense of profound gratitude in his eyes. "I, Pack, we will be forever in your debt. I will tell them you are here. And I will send word. But you are a part of us now. You are his mate." He nodded, a silent farewell, and then in a blink he was gone, a silent shadow swallowed by the trees. The two of them were left alone in the woods, a man who was no longer just a man and a woman who had just had her entire world turned upside down. The silence between them was thick with a new, beautiful understanding. Jess looked at him, her eyes wide with 1,000 questions. "A werewolf?" she whispered. Hardin came closer, taking her hands in his. His touch was no longer tentative, it was firm and sure. "I'm a werewolf, Jess. It's who I am. But it doesn't change what I feel for you. You're my home. You're my mate. I found my true self in you." Tears, hot and silent, welled in her eyes. "I thought you were just a lost stray," she whispered, a watery smile on her face. He let out a low, rumbling laugh that was part man, part wolf. "I was. But you gave me a second chance. You gave me a new beginning. You loved me when I was just a broken stranger on a road, and because of that I'm whole again. I'm not broken. I'm just a werewolf in love with a woman who has a heart for strays." She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest. He held her close, breathing in her scent, the scent that was his anchor in this world, the scent that was his home. He wasn't a broken man. He was a werewolf, and his place was with the woman he loved. The story concludes with Jess and Hardin standing together, a testament to the power of love, of acceptance, and of finding your way home in the most unlikely of places. Epilogue. A few months later, the shelter was busier than ever, a bustling hub of happy barks and wagging tails. But the sanctuary had expanded. It was no longer just a place for strays. It was a home for a family of humans and canines and one very powerful wolf. Hardin, now comfortable with the name Aiden, no longer hid his instincts. He would sit on the roof, a silent sentinel watching over his home, his golden eyes glowing in the moonlight. He was no longer running. Liam visited often, bringing news of the pack, his own amber eyes filled with gratitude. He no longer saw a broken man and a strange human, but an alpha who had found his Luna. And Jess, who had a heart for strays, had found a new kind of family. It was a world of magic and love, a world where a lost wolf had found his home in the heart of a kind woman. So what a ride, right? From a rainy road to a love that healed a curse, Jess and Hardin's story is a testament to the fact that home isn't a place, it's a person. Let me know what you think about their story in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to my channel for more werewolf romance stories. See you next time.